Good morning, everyone. I trust we have an audience out there. Let me just see if I can see on the chat. Okay, yes, people are joining us now. Wonderful. Brilliant. We'll just wait a moment for people to join us and then we will make a start. Right, good morning everyone and welcome to the 2021 Communicate Conference on the road to COP15 and COP26. Thanks ever so much for joining this opening session entitled Nature Uniting a Divided Britain. This is an hour-long discussion to get you started at the outset of the conference, and we're going to cover a range of topical themes. This early in the conference, we're not promising to offer any answers, but we will be posing lots of questions and hopefully getting those mental cogs whirring at the start of what promises to be a really interesting and thought-provoking conference. My name is Lisa Chilton, and I'm the Chief Exec of the National Biodiversity Network Trust. We're a charity that's passionate about biodiversity data, the evidence that underpins, or should underpin, all good decision-making about the environment. We manage the National Biodiversity Network, which is the UK's largest partnership for nature, and which brings together organisations large and small to share, use and reuse biodiversity data. And our NBN Atlas is a huge online portal that enables nearly or more than 200 million species records to be shared and viewed by anyone. We're also passionate about the enormous volunteer effort that goes into collecting that all-important biodiversity data, and we champion and celebrate those tens of thousands of volunteers across the UK who spend their spare time recording wildlife. With me this morning are three guests, each with a wealth of experience and expertise to share with you. We have Isabel Gornal, who is the Managing Director and founder of Seahorse Environmental, a specialist PR and lobbying consultancy. Seahorse clients include Greenpeace, WWF and the European Climate Foundation. Isabella is also chair of the UK 100, a group of 100 cities committed, a group of cities committed to 100% clean energy. And she was also co-founder of the All-Party Group on Sustainable Finance. Catherine Matheson is Chief Exec of the British Science Association, a charity founded 190 years ago. The British Science Association's mission is to transform the diversity and inclusivity of science, to reach underserved audiences and to increase the number of people actively engaged in science. Catherine has been CEO at the BSA for 5 years and has a really impressive background in science communication, citizen science and diversity and inclusion. And then finally, Danielle Mulder is Director of Sustainability at the BBC. She is developing and leading the BBC's climate strategy and has worked in sustainability for many years, primarily as a consultant. She has advised on many large international projects, including London 2012 and the Sydney Metro. So really impressive lineup. I'm going to guide them through a series of questions culminating in a discussion which will hopefully get you all started and whet your appetite for what's going to be a really exciting 2 days of conversations. So my first question to each of the panel in turn, although feel free to also say a little bit more about your background if I haven't done an adequate job of introducing you. My first question is to ask you, what's on your road to COP15 and COP26? So what are your priorities in the run-up to these major international events? And I'm going to go first to Isabella.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and it's really lovely to be here. Seahorse got quite a number of clients, so I want to sort of rattle through them, but hopefully that will sort of help with either Q&A or for the discussion. I think really the main thing is we're focusing on the money right now. We have got a very big spending review coming up before COP, so we have been finalising clients' submissions to the spending review. We obviously want to get as much money as possible towards nature, net zero, and others. We are awaiting some really big announcements, which is going to be the bellwether, I think, for where the rest of the autumn goes. The heat and building strategy, the net zero strategy, the net zero review, all of these are due before COP, we hope. So I think really the money is the really big thing. In terms of specific issues, we are trying to make sure that COP15 doesn't get left behind and all of the COP26 sort of heat. We're working on carbon taxes, trying to protect the UK's rivers. We're looking at the food strategy white paper and what that means for nature. We're looking at sustainable agriculture, support for small-scale fishers and the post-Brexit fishing landscape. We're trying to protect the endangered temperate rainforests of Britain and ending fast fashion, and we're doing quite a lot of work this month with Secondhand September and trying to get MPs engaged on that issue. So there's a lot going on, but I can go into any more detail. But yeah, that's really, yeah, it's a lot.
That's incredibly wide-ranging, Isabella. Within that, what do you think is the issue that's going to have the most traction in terms of the COPs?
I think it's going to be the spending review, the net zero strategy, because these are what's coming out of Treasury, and I think that is going to really indicate to us how much the government wants to prioritise nature and the environment and net zero. It's really going to indicate their seriousness around this. So those are the main things for us.
And what would a successful outcome look like for you in relation to the spending review?
I would like a lot more money towards the natural environment, especially rivers. We don't have a single clean river here in the UK. In fact, our nearest cleanest one is in France. So we want a lot more money towards that. We want billions of investment towards retrofitting homes, towards investment in clean tech, levelling up agenda, all of that. So yeah, there is a lot in there, but I think we're going to need to see multi-billions of investment from the government.
And you're quite close to these conversations. What's the mood music? Are you feeling optimistic?
I'd like to be, yes. I think obviously COVID has put one giant spanner in the works. And I think also the government are sort of weighing up how much to announce in the spending review versus what they want to get out of COP, and they want to save some big announcements for that, which is going to be very important. But ultimately, we have a month left before the spending review. You will see daily now more and more polling coming out, more and more data, research, papers, everything, with all of the key arguments that the Chancellor needs to basically say, you know what, there's actually no reason to not invest in this. Early investment is actually going to ultimately cost less than waiting longer. So, you know, we hope as the environment sector and as a group of lobbyists across various different tranches of the sort of clean tech world that all of the arguments are sort of hitting home. But, you know, they know a lot of it. They're very well briefed. Everyone's been working incredibly hard on this. So, you know, I think we have a very good shot at it.
Well, that's about as encouraging as I guess we could expect at this time, and fantastic introduction. Thanks ever so much, Isabella. I'm going to go to Catherine now. What's on your road to the COPs?
Good morning, Lisa. Thanks for the introduction. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. The work that we do at the British Science Association, which is about engaging people on a broad range of science-based topics. So we're neutral about the topic and we cover the widest possible range. What we're seeking to do really is a bit more long-term, so to build confidence among people who wouldn't typically engage with science or science-based issues, build confidence, provide opportunities, build relationships that can lead, that can sort of pave the way for longer-term engagement. So I'm going to give 3 examples of how we try and do that relate to the upcoming COP. So it's important for us to support engagement in a range of places. So we work across the UK, and last week we were in Chelmsford, being hosted by Anglia Ruskin University to put on the annual British Science Festival. And we had over 100 free events actually, so we had the widest possible range of topics. But there was at least one event every day that was particularly themed around the climate crisis and about the data that has developed our understanding of the crisis, or about research into what we can do about it. And there was one of the very few digital events that was allowed to sneak into the programme was about environmental prosperity for all and a just transition. So that was really exciting to bring together a range of people who are locally based around the festival with people from across the UK. Our work also extends into building relationships with senior stakeholders. You'd be surprised sometimes, well, you probably wouldn't be surprised actually, the audience here, about sometimes people in very senior positions of leadership in business or policy actually feel quite disconnected from science, or they feel a lack of confidence about their own science background. And of course, it's important for those people to be part of the discussions as well. So we have a thought leadership programme called Forethought, which brings together leaders from research, business and policy to talk about science-based issues. And of course, topics like net zero and the climate crisis are never far away from that agenda. And then the final example is actually not on this topic at all. It's on mental health, but it's about building relationships between researchers and locally led community organisations. And I know a lot of work goes into building relationships between those two groups, but often the researchers have the power, they have the budget, they're in control of the timetable. And for the locally led community organisation, it feels like they're kind of landed on by these researchers for a period of time and then abandoned again. And so we're trying to figure out a slightly better way of configuring that kind of partnership with our Ideas Fund, which is a new programme for us. So yes, I hope that gives you a flavour of what we've been doing, Lisa.
That's excellent. Thank you, Catherine. How literate do you feel? This is a very general question, but is there an issue with science literacy within our decision makers, do you think?
Well, I'm going to say no to that. I mean, we can always find examples of people sort of tripping up over a bit of science knowledge, but it's not helpful to kind of to point it out usually. I mean, the pandemic has demonstrated that people from all walks of life can obtain the scientific knowledge they need if they really need it. And anyone who's been suddenly diagnosed with a new health condition, or someone in their family has, or you've just moved to a new place and suddenly you need to find out about flooding and subsidence, or you can obtain the knowledge you need if you really need it. I think the issue that we see more commonly is about permission or entitlement, or a sense of feeling welcome in that space where people are talking about science topics. And that's the thing we're really trying to grapple with, this idea of a science being part of your identity. So people sometimes tell us, well, about a quarter of the population actually in our surveys say, oh, science is not for me. And that includes people with some quite hefty science qualifications, or some quite sciencey jobs, but they feel like science is not for me. And so it's more of a question of identity and culture, I think. That's the barrier that we're particularly interested in trying to understand, because I think if we can do more to understand and reduce those barriers, then the knowledge will follow as needed.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And you mentioned mental health. That's something we're going to come back to, or anxiety particularly, around a question that we're coming on to shortly. Thanks ever so much, Catherine. Right, Danielle, over to you. What's on your road to COP15 and COP26?
Yeah, thanks so much, Lisa. And it's great to be part of this conversation this morning and this conference. So thank you again for the invitation to join this session. BBC's been really busy, actually, in advance of COP26. We do feel the pressure of COP26, and the organisation is at the moment what we're developing and have been since March this year, actually, developing our COP26 ready sort of net zero strategy. So our approach is very much aligned and underpinned by scientific rigour. So we are adopting what we call science-based targets as our net zero strategy. And there's a lot of work involved to get a big organisation, big global organisation, group level BBC as we call it, for all of the divisions. Everything from news to sport to content to TV to radio. We've had to undertake a lot of detailed baselining or modelling and actually do a carbon footprint in effect across the BBC. So that work's been underway, that's completed, the baselining, so we do have a very accurate picture of what our emissions are across the BBC, and we've submitted that evidence pack, as we call it in science-based target world, to the SBTi. So we're currently going through an approval process with the Science-Based Target Initiative, because we believe that that is the most credible way of developing a net zero strategy, to have targets in place that are aligned to the science. So that's where we are. And some more to be said on that topic, in the next month, actually. Once we get that approval complete, some internal approvals, then we will be making our announcements around what net zero means for the BBC and how we are going to deliver against that programme. Separately as well, we've also been aligning to something called TCFD, so apologies for the acronyms, and I think this is what puts people off the science sometimes. Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosures is what TCFD stands for, and it's a really good framework or standard governance framework in effect for enabling organisations such as BBC to assess what the climate risk is on an organisation like the BBC. So this is more climate risk on the BBC rather than our responsibility to ensure that we meet the science and we don't have emissions that exceed our responsibilities of contributing to greater than 1.5 degree warming scenarios. So it's pretty technical stuff going on at the BBC as we develop that programme, and we've gone through a readiness assessment and actually materiality assessment to determine what our risks, climate risks, both physical and transition risks are, but also what the opportunities are for the BBC, because I totally subscribe to the view that you need to get ahead of this agenda. We need to be very active, and the earlier that we pursue the strategy and mitigate our risks that are on the BBC, that this will derive enormous benefit. And organisations that do this well, benefit hugely from this, from getting it right and getting ahead of the agenda and taking this stance. And then separately, what we've been doing, obviously, is we are a major broadcaster at COP26. So we're preparing a sort of a programme of events that will be very much at the event, watching the event as it unfolds, and reporting against the progress that we're hoping will be made at this major event that's happening here in the UK. Obviously, we're very fortunate that it's here in Glasgow in November, and not forgetting COP15 as well. I completely agree with that. So just to mention, as part of our net zero strategy, we are looking at what we call our removal strategy as well, and that includes things like investment in natural systems, which picks up the nature and biodiversity piece as well. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of what we're up to the BBC, but we've been incredibly busy. Yeah.
Thank you, Danielle. Having delved so deeply into the BBC's sustainability and climate footprint, what were the biggest surprises, or what do you think were the key points that came out?
I think, the challenge is always the data, getting the data and going around an organisation and ensuring that you've picked up the data accurately across an organisation as big and as complex as the BBC. I'm I've been doing net zero for a while. I probably consider myself a sort of net zero specialist or carbon specialist. I think a lot of people are surprised by the scale of their what we call scope 3 emissions. So, so we have scope 1 emissions, which is the fossil fuels that we buy. Scope 2 emissions is the electricity that we purchase, that somebody else is in effect potentially burning fossil fuels on your behalf. And then scope 3 emissions is everything else in effect. And that always surprises people. And so for the BBC, it's coming in at 98% of our emissions profile or our total footprint. And I think a lot of people are always surprised by that, realizing the scale of the emissions, the scale of the collaboration that is needed with our supply chain and our industry partners. But, I see that as an opportunity. We're working very much with industry on this challenge, because equally our peers such as Sky, ITV, Netflix have the same challenge as well in terms of their supply chain emissions. So it gives an opportunity for us to come together actually and work together on this problem, which is exactly what we should be doing.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, we're going to move on to our second question now, which is, what challenge would you pose to the Communicate delegates over the next couple of days as they embark on this exciting event with all the conversations? What specifically would you encourage people to think about and to challenge themselves with? And I'm going to start this time with Catherine.
Thanks, Lisa. So my challenge is very simple. It is, I would encourage you all to ask yourself a 2-word question every time you're delivering some engagement or planning some engagement or thinking about somebody else's engagement. And the question is, who's missing in this event space that we are in, that you might be in, or the venue or the digital space, or wherever you are trying to engage a particular audience on a particular topic? Who's not in the room with you? And how do we reach those people? Because we won't succeed in our endeavours unless there's a much stronger and bigger coalition of us behind it. So yeah, that's my challenge. Who's missing?
Brilliant, an excellent one to kick off. We are going to go next to Danielle.
Thank you. Yeah, I think given where we are and the climate emergency that we face, I think I would like to challenge everybody to, as a result of this conference and the learnings that will be shared, what is the one thing that you are going to ensure gets changed in your organization? So go after one thing and make it happen, whether it be getting in place a net zero strategy, setting science-based targets, thinking about a biodiversity strategy and how your organization can commit to that. But I would challenge everybody to just keep it simple, one thing, and make that change within your organization.
Wonderful. And over to you, Isabella.
Thank you. I would absolutely agree with those. I suppose just to sort of add one, if you are trying to get an ask of government, or you are trying to get media coverage of a campaign you are working on, do you think that your ask is aligned with what the government is trying to do on their agenda? How are you going to get your foot in that door? What is the language that they keep using? And just make sure that you're constantly referring to that. Put yourself in their shoes and say, how can I actually align my ask with them to make it more likely that they will adopt it? So that's, yeah, my challenge.
Thank you all. So I'm going to run through those again, but we will also come back to them at the end of the session. So first of all, from Catherine, who's missing? Secondly, what's the one thing that you need to change in your organisation? So that one questioned by Danielle, our net zero expert in the room. So what do you need to change in your organisation? What's that one thing that you're going to leave the conference on a mission to achieve? And thirdly, if you're asking something of government in the run up to COP15, COP26 or beyond, do you think your ask is aligned with the government's priority? To put yourself in their shoes. So that's three really thought-provoking and hopefully helpful and practical questions to arm you with as you go out into the wider conference. But now we're going to move on to our third question, which is drawing on a news story that's come out today. So you may have seen there's an article in The Guardian today with the headline, 4 in 10 young people fear having children due to the climate crisis. The global survey has found that 4 in 10 young people around the world are hesitant to have children as a result of the climate crisis and fear that governments are doing too little to prevent climate catastrophe, a poll in 10 countries has found. Nearly 6 in 10 young people, aged 16 to 25, were very worried or extremely worried about climate change, according to the biggest scientific study yet on climate anxiety and young people. A similar number said governments were not protecting them, the planet, or future generations, and felt betrayed by the older generations and governments. 3/4 agreed with the statement, the future is frightening, and more than half felt that they would have fewer opportunities than their parents. Nearly half reported feeling distressed or anxious about the climate. So over to our guests. That's a pretty shocking, if not altogether surprising set of statistics. What's your take on it, and how can we as a community present here in the room and at the conference today do something about it? And I'm going to start with Danielle this time.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, it's sad, actually, that article. I read it this morning as well, and it is that sort of sense that young people are losing hope that's attached to this anxiety. So I think, we need to channel that anxiety into positive action. And some of my bedtime reading is the stuff of nightmares, to be honest with you, as to the state of the planet and the fact that we're hurtling towards, certain sort of temperature scenarios that the scientists say that we are, biodiversity collapse, it is the stuff of nightmares sometimes. But the way I personally cope with it is that I channel that into action, into my day job, in effect. And, we have to do that, I think, as leaders, to sort of instill hope and opportunity and a positive outlook that we can affect this change. Personally, I've had conversations with my daughter about this, and she said the same to me, that she doesn't think she wants to have kids because the future does look quite bleak. And I'm hoping that I haven't, because of what I talk about sometimes, I haven't instilled an additional anxiety on her. But we really need to get it seeded in our minds that we need nature more than nature needs us. We really need to flip this thing, and this complete hubris that we have as human beings, that we sort of preside over nature and have control over nature, and we can do what we like, is clearly not working. The water we drink, or the food that we eat, everything that we require to survive, is necessary to survive. We're completely dependent on nature. Yeah, so we need to flip this conversation into, we are part of nature. We don't preside over it. We're very much part of nature, and we need to interact with it and respect it. And I think we can channel, once we get people engaged on that, that could be quite transformational if we get that conversation right, and people will start feeling more hopeful and more positive by doing so.
Thanks, Danielle. Do you have any examples of that flip working? What sort of messages do you think are most effective in achieving that transformation, turning things on their head, that we need nature more than nature needs us?
Yeah, I guess it sort of reflects on sort of personal experiences. I was very fortunate. I did an MSc in environmental science in Sydney, Australia, and I got taught by an Aboriginal lady who taught me ecology as part of my course. And she used to take us outside, actually, for all our lectures, which I thought that was quite interesting, because it did actually change the dynamic, and it changed the learning environment. And she used to talk about the plants and the animals that we were seeing on our way to sort of like where we were going to sit down and have a chat. But she really instilled on me that, this concept of land, and that she impressed upon me that the land owns us. We don't own the land. And that really affected me, that message, because it became quite clear to me that if you look at some of these indigenous communities, that the ultimate ecologists, they really understand that we are in nature and part of nature as mammals, and have a huge responsibility because we're very intelligent mammals on how we affect nature. So I think it's just about having this conversation, really, because we all feel it when we go out for walks, when we connect, when we're gardening, even small interactions we have in nature. And we've seen this during the pandemic. And we've seen this, some of the audience stats actually that we get at the BBC, is that this is an intergenerational interest and issue where people are starting to slow down and dial into nature and appreciate what happens to you when you're, the chemistry that happens to you, particularly when you are in nature, and the health and well-being benefits that we get from that. And I think we just need to keep thinking about that and, have this conversation to make people understand, why we need it so much, why we need the wild, why we need nature. I think it needs to be a constant conversation.
Thank you. I think that's very well put, Danielle. We've got a couple of comments coming in from delegates. Elizabeth Hancock has said it's less a question of having children and more about their education and the sustainable use of natural resources and respect for the intrinsic value of nature. Aware people would raise aware children. I'm a third generation land manager / ecologist. Well, fantastic. It's definitely in your blood then, Elizabeth. And then Natasha Clark says, we're choosing adoption as a way to build our family. It would be great to add family building and how we could provide for our families to the conversation. Indeed. Well, Natasha, take that as a challenge for the next 2 days then, to start building that in. Okay, I'm going to move on now to Isabella, please.
Thank you. I would have to agree. I think it's very sad. And I think most of us here spend our day campaigning, fighting for change, and working very hard on this, understanding all of the arguments and why this needs to be done, and sit there feeling frustrated when you see more inaction, or the fact that we've had our recent trade deal with the UK and Australia said, no, we want to scrap all of that environment stuff in there. And they were like, yeah, cool, that's fine. And everyone's just sat there thinking, well, hang on a second, I thought that was the whole point. And so I totally get it. I don't have kids myself. I would like them, but I think ultimately we need to kind of put our feet where our mouths are on this and, campaign, vote. We have to go with the manifestos. You have to campaign to get them in there. And ultimately, a lot of this is going to come down to legislative change, and moments like COP are so important. But it's that, every 4 years when we have an election and everything like that, you have to keep pushing, and also speaking to older generations, allowing them to understand how you feel. I mean, I definitely think, we've seen this mass movement of young people, which is absolutely brilliant, but we do need to bring the older generations with us as well. So I think kind of spreading out some of those conversations will also help. But I think, going back to the title of this, nature uniting a divided Britain, there are also so many things that we can do in our own homes, in our gardens, in our local communities. I'm helping this week with this new pollinator program in London, and it's really nice. It's small scale, but I think we all have to do these little things that we feel are personal wins, that we all can kind of push for and make our own individual change. So I would also really recommend that, because being outside in nature always helps with anxiety, I think.
Thanks very much, Isabella. Just a couple more comments from delegates. And Matthew Lipton says, as a father of 2, I do feel a lot of anxiety and concern about their future. It doesn't look good, but that drives me in my job as biodiversity manager to push positive changes. It's hard to overcome the anxiety and worry. I want to go out and protest or scream, but I can't. So I use my energy in my job and my own personal life to take what action I can. I try to lead a good example for them. Not everyone is perfect or can make sweeping changes, but we must try to do what we can. I think that's really true. I mean, I think at different stages, I suspect we all suffer from eco-anxiety. Immersed as we are in this day-to-day, it's hard not to. And certainly myself, I've had days when I've felt really helpless and other days when I've, woken up raring to go and feeling I can really make a difference. And as Danielle said, we need to be showing leadership, and we need to be supporting each other, because we will go through we will feel these emotions on this really tough journey. But it's so important when we are feeling that we focus on those small things that we can all do. And as Matthew said, no one is perfect, but we can all make a difference. Okay, over to you, Catherine, to speak to this one.
Thanks, Lisa. And I really like the hopeful message that's coming from the comments. And I'm naturally very optimistic as a person. I want to say how wonderful that there's so much energy and desire to do something among the 14 to 25-year-olds. And of course, there are some great examples we can point to. The UK's reduced reliance on coal, for example, over the last 30 years. There's some successes. So I really want to be optimistic, but I'm finding that difficult on this topic, particularly. I think I was really surprised that the article, the level of anxiety that young people were reporting was just off the scale, I think. As you said when you were introducing this, nearly 6 in 10 young people reporting being very or extremely worried. That's interfering with daily life levels of worry. That's a significant burden for those young people to carry. Over 50% of young people said they are sad, anxious, angry, powerless, helpless, guilty. I mean, what a burden of negative and draining emotions. And I hear a lot of talk about the mental health, the long tail of mental health burden as a result of COVID, but I don't hear anywhere near as much talk about the mental health effects of climate anxiety. And I think there should be a lot more of that. I am particularly struck. So this study was not a quick, vox pop on the street. It was 10,000 people across 10 countries. And I think in the age groups of the people they were talking to, the 14 to 25-year-olds, that's the period that I think for most of us, it shapes our attitudes to life for the rest of our lives. And for those young people now, I think this period they will look back at a period defined by fear, and a period that washed away all the certainties. Do your exams. Oh no, COVID, don't do any exams. They're not important. Oh yeah, they are again. It begins to look like the grown-ups don't really know what they're doing. With the greatest respect to all the people in this conference, of course, who do, of course, know what we're doing. But I worry about societal breakdown. I worry about increasing tension between generations as a result of this mistrust, the kind of thing that Isabella talked about. So sorry to be doom and gloom there, Lisa.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to bring in a comment from Jian Hong in the audience, who said, "We need a hope revolution. The more intelligence, influence, power and reach an organisation, corporate, government or person has, the more hope they should provide to facilitate change." And thank you very much for that. We do all have a part to play. Right, okay, well, finally, on to our last question before we just sort of go into a more general discussion. What do you think about the title of this session? So, Nature Uniting a Divided Britain. What does that mean to you? And what do we need to do? Where are the rays of hope with which we can achieve nature uniting a divided Britain? And I'm going to Catherine first for this one.
Thanks, Lisa. I love the idea of a hope revolution. Like Kirsty says in the chat, let's do that. I think that there are so many divisions evident in society. We were just talking about generational division. We could talk about Brexit. We could talk about politics. We could talk about, we talk about football. We talk about so many divisions. And I think one of the things that underlies all of those kind of types of arguments is an assumption that we're in a zero-sum game. That if you have more, I have less. That if you win, I lose. And I think what this community does really well is it takes that assumption apart. You know, when it comes to the natural world, the solutions have to work for everybody or they're not going to fly. And so I think this community has decades more experience than most other communities of trying to unpick those kinds of false dichotomy based debates. I mean, nature can bring this to life. I mean, literally as well, you know. We have, there's a great deal of learning about ways to use natural resources better to meet the needs of more people over a longer period of time. And I think if we can unite people around protecting nature or understanding how to do that better, understanding that it's not a kind of win-lose situation, but that there's a way of kind of sharing the resources more equitably and creating more out of what we have started with. I think if we can unite people around that, we can use that to build divisions across a wide range of topics as well. So the community here at this conference are the people who give me hope on that.
Well, perhaps that's our challenge for the conference then, to focus on how we do that, and welcome people to be sharing examples of that in the chat. Over to you, Danielle.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great sort of question, isn't it? You know, can it unite? I think it can unite us. I think we've got a long way to go, and it goes back to my earlier point around this appreciation of our natural systems, placing a value of them, and you know, really embracing this concept that we need nature more than nature needs us, and that we, you know, that we need the quicker that we galvanize behind that and understand it, I think the better. We run audience stats all the time. We do ask questions around sustainability, and actually it's not as bad as we think in terms of intergenerational concern on this issue. So the numbers are going up in terms of concern generally. So we're up at about 32% of the general public are concerned about climate change, and that does actually spread across younger populations, but also older populations as well. We look at different socioeconomic groupings as well, and you do get some variances. The variances tend to come in not the identification of the concern, which is across generations and people want to do something about it, but more about their level of knowledge and their confidence in their level of knowledge. Women seem to be more concerned about this issue than men. And say that they need help with understanding the complexity of the science. Younger populations say they have a lower, you know, an understanding of the science they believe, but it's broader and that they want to know more about it and want to do something about it. So I think it's already there. The evidence is there that we are moving, you know, everybody's concerned about this, wants to play their part. I think what people struggle with and why they lose hope is that they don't know what to do. You know, I mean, I'm obviously a consumer as well as working in this field, and you go to shops, you go to the supermarkets, and it is very confusing about what you feel that you could actually do at that level to affect real change when you go, you know, when you buy your food, for example, or when you're driving your car. You know, and I think the government obviously has a big play in this, in its policy that it lays out. But businesses have a huge part to play in this, and you know, bigger than people realize actually, because as a consumer, you're kind of at the mercy sometimes of these big businesses and what they're doing. You don't have complete transparency of you know, perhaps, you know, how they're handling their waste, for example, the electricity they buy, etc., etc. So you feel blinded by it and feel frustrated by that. So I think business needs to really play its part in this conversation and take responsibility. And again, we are seeing that. You know, we're seeing, you know, I think we're over 1,700 companies are adopting science-based targets at the moment. COP26 is galvanizing a lot of corporate activity around this topic as well, which is really, really good for us as consumers. So what I'm seeing is that I am seeing generations coming together on this topic. I think the, you know, revolution of hope in that conversation is a really, really good thing. And yes, it should unite us, to be honest with you, if we can truly embrace that concept that we need nature, all of us.
Thank you, Danielle. Before I go over to Isabella, I'm just going to pick out a comment in the chat. So Jenny Shipway said, given that academics and environmental activists are generally left-leaning, is there not a danger that climate will instead become another wedge issue are there enough right-wing climate organisations to speak to those audiences, thinking perhaps about who's not in the room? And I think you're probably particularly well placed to come back on that one, Isabella, and give us your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. I was actually going to answer that, Jenny. It is a really interesting point, but actually I don't agree. And I think at this point, climate is so cross-party. I mean, they are, each individual party is fighting to be more ambitious. They don't even necessarily see it as right-wing policies versus left anymore. I mean, and actually, given the fact that we have had a Conservative government for so long now, you know, they were the first Western government to legislate for net zero. They fought to host COP. They are fighting to be global leaders in this, and actually working with a lot of the big environmental groups. As I was saying earlier, around, are your arse aligned to what the government is trying to do? So actually, whether you are a member of the Labour Party but trying to influence the Conservative Party, it doesn't actually matter, because if you've got good arguments, if you know how you're trying to make them, and you've kind of whittled everything down in terms of this is how it actually aligns with what this current government is trying to achieve, you can win. So I don't think it has to be very political. And of course, we want them to be fighting on ambition. We want each one to say, I'm going to be more ambitious, which is great. So I don't think, like certain other policy areas, well, they say, no, that's a very Labour thing, I would never, ever do that. At this point, they're like, no, I want to beat the other one. So I think that's good. In terms of the Nature uniting a divided Britain, I really want to actually go down to what that Nature things, what that means, because I assume that means a healthy environment, allowing nature to thrive. And with that, I think we really need to think of some of the sort of socio-economic issues around that, with green spaces, access to that, and clean air, and all of these natural environment things that we need that actually relate to health as well. And I think that that's really, really important. I don't really want that to get lost, and having local biodiversity campaigns where people are trying to reintroduce certain species and trees and clean up our air. I think that's so important. So I kind of wanted to bring back some of those health things as well in terms of nature, not just for increasing it for the sake of increasing biodiversity, but what that means for society. And I think also I just want to sort of end on one note, really, because yes, COP26 and COP15 are really big moments, but us as a group here are not directly influencing the high level negotiations at these. And of course, we can push for the UK government to try and increase their ambition, but I think very few of us are going to be in the room at those. What we really need to be focusing on is actually what happens when these are done, right? When this current government is no longer hosting COP. And what are we as a community going to do to maintain the pressure? Because right now everyone is using the big COPs as the reason to, oh, if you want to be a global leader at COP, you must do this, this, and this. And everyone's like piling it on at the moment. But when we don't have that as a hook, what are we going to be doing? And I think that's something that I hope will continue throughout this conference, because it's a really important point.
It is indeed. And, you know, I think we've all experienced targets arising from these sorts of meetings, coming and going, and, you know, they're a focus, but then we miss them. You know, there's a lot of cynicism out there as well, I think, particularly within the expert community, if you like, around the benefits of targets and whether there isn't ever going to be enough action to meet them. Would anyone like to come back on that comment?
Yeah, I think the time for talk is over, really, isn't it? I mean, it's great that we've got COP15 and COP26 as a way of sort of galvanizing action and bringing everybody to the table on this. But there are, I am, worried as well, actually, about a lot of these media announcements that happen, where, they've got a big headline and they sort of like make an announcement. So this is about substance, and it is about credibility, and we do need to hold people to account on that. And that's certainly the approach that we're taking at the BBC, which is why we're doing this very, very carefully and aligning to the science and the Science-Based Target Initiative about what is credible, in terms of setting a science-based target. This isn't about necessarily, a race and, get your checkbook out and how quickly can we, this isn't about that for me. This is about real change that we have to enact across our organizations. So, and nobody really talks about in these announcements, if you watch some, they don't talk about how difficult it's going to be. I know how difficult, and it scares me, how difficult and challenging this is going to be. So we've got sort of 4 things that we're focusing on at the BBC. So we want to eliminate fossil fuels across the BBC as quickly and as efficiently as we can. We know that's hard. We use fossil fuels and gas in particular in our buildings. We're going to we do implement sustainable production. We have a target of 100% of our productions to be using a standard called Albert, which is a sustainable production standard. And we're constantly looking at ways to eliminate impacts during the production of all our programs and editorial. The third one is around supply chain. I talked about scope 3 earlier, and working with our suppliers, bringing them on this journey, helping them, supporting them, not making this a point the finger of, we've got emissions that come from you, but how can we address them together, and having that conversation, because we do have the expertise, at the BBC to support our suppliers, particularly our smaller suppliers and SMEs, and bring them into the conversation. And then finally, around new ways of working and living effectively, the way that we work, the way that we get to the work, the energy that we utilize, the resources that we use, but also the way that we live our lives as well, because, we're all, end consumers, we're all participants in this conversation. So it's how do we inform, educate, audiences around that, about what they can actually do as an individual to affect that change. So, but the time for talk is over, in my view. This is definitely about substance, and we want to see real action, real plans, and we need to hold people to account on what they're saying.
Brilliant, thank you. Isabella, Catherine, did you want to come in?
I mean, I agree completely with those points. And I think for non-specialist audiences, it is difficult, I think, to understand what one can do or should do, and what's the most effective thing to be doing. And quite a lot of the substance, obviously, is made by large organisations or a larger scale than we are individually. And I think there's a kind of a risk of sort of paralysis when there's all this information. I think there's a lack of a kind of single authoritative guide for people in their everyday lives about individual actions. So there's lots of organisations that specialise in a particular type of, how to reduce kind of water use, or how to, deal with fabrics and clothing, or whatever it might be. But getting, knowing who to trust, I think, is an issue for some members of the public. But I'm sure we'll get onto that in later sessions.
Just thinking again about uniting a divided Britain, and the extraordinary shift that has happened in terms of single-use plastic just in the space of a few years. What do you think we can learn from that in terms of uniting people behind a significant environmental issue? Catherine, did you want to?
So I think asking ourselves what has gone before and what can we learn from it is an extremely useful thing to be doing. I don't have a particular specialism in this area, so I may be wrong. My sense is that the tax on single-use plastic shopping bags, the charge on that, made a big difference to public opinion. One of those examples where public opinion was lagging about whether to introduce that, and then the policy change happened, and then public opinion, was largely favourable, that the policy was ahead of the public opinion. Other examples, I think, of that sort of are around things like smoking in public places, same-sex marriage, seatbelts. Other examples where policymakers took a little bit of a leap of faith. We can see public opinion building here, and we're just going to get out in front of it and make the policy. And public opinion suddenly rushes to meet that position. So I think that was a really good policy change, and I think it helped people have come, you know, in very everyday settings. Why don't I get a bag? Oh, this is why. Oh, I need to bring one here. It really prompted a widespread change in people's behaviour, and I think that was one of the factors which has led to people questioning the amount of plastic they see in other settings as well.
Isabella, did you want to comment on that one?
Yes, thank you. So I think the single-use sort of plastic bag charge was so brilliant, and again, in terms of the ask of that, Wales had done it so successfully that the sort of, in terms of the devolved issues, England then said, okay, we should do this too, and it was amazingly effective. However, they then stopped. They started using those big plastic bags for life, which actually plastic consumption ended up being higher. And so now, you know, Morrison's has now just gone, right, we're just going paper, we're just going to scrap this. And actually, I think that the public are very understanding of that, because they try to do something great and think, okay, next. And this is what we have to do, right? We have to be creative. We have to try and come up with solutions. They will not all work, but you know, we are very good at adapting, and yeah, I think it was absolutely brilliant. And obviously, the blue planet effect was so brilliant. And I think what I'm really looking for now, and something we're working on, is a big government communications campaign around net zero now. And actually being very clear with the public. I mean, I'm obviously, as I'm sure a lot of people are, deeply concerned about some of the headlines. Everyone's going to have to pay £15,000 for a heat pump. And actually, that's not accurate in terms of how the market is going to shift here. And I think because we're still waiting for all these big policy announcements this autumn, once they're out there, they really need to start communicating, because the public is so willing. And I think, you know, we can actually see some real shifts here, which could be very exciting. And just to finally on that, we had a target to phase out new diesel and petrol cars by 2040. But the car manufacturers then shifted so much faster that then they brought it forward to 2035, because they thought, actually, it's now not even ambitious, right? So actually, when they start doing these, you watch the market shift. So it's all these little points that they can do, and we can see some great changes.
Thank you, Isabella. That's terrific. We're nearly at the end of the session. I can't believe how quickly it's flown. I was there worrying about, you know, would we have enough to talk about for an hour? But of course we do. And there's going to be so much to talk about over the next couple of days. So I want to say an enormous thank you to our three guests, Catherine, Isabella and Danielle. I want to thank everyone who has participated in this session so honestly and so actively. And I want to leave you with those three challenges that our guests posed. So firstly, a big question for you to be pondering with every conversation you have: who is missing? Who needs to be here, and how do we get them? Secondly, what's the one thing that you're going to commit to changing in your organisation? So over the next 2 days, let that one rumble around in your mind and take away from the conference one thing that you want to change in your organisation. And thirdly, since we started the conversation talking about COP15, COP26, if you're asking something of government, how is that aligned with the government's own priorities? Are you talking their language? Are you helping them achieve something that they need to achieve? Because if you are, that's going to be so much more powerful. So go, listen, engage, enjoy the conference over the next 2 days. Thank you again to everyone here, and all the best in what is, as we know, an anxiety-raising but so important conversation. So all the best, and see you in a conversation later. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.